I posted several polls over the last few weeks asking you guys who your favorite hybrid Saiyans were for a popularity poll. And not only did the results come back one-sided as expected, but it showed that present Trunks is by far the least liked. In two separate polls, he got 1% of the votes, and because of this, I decided to follow up on Professor Goten's comment and do a direct poll pitting Goten against Trunks directly, and Trunks lost this poll too by a big margin. Now, of course, it's hard to pinpoint the accuracy and bias of this poll considering the fact that King Kirby suggests that you guys were trying to spite me because of the video I made that Goten has no fans. But statistics are statistics, and it's pretty clear in the community that Goten and Trunks are not very liked by fans. Goten specifically because, there really is no character to talk about, and in the case of present Trunks, he definitely has more character to him than Goten, but that's actually the reason why fans hate him even more. But why is it that these characters are hated so much in the community? Well, the first reason what we could break down here is the fact that, specifically talking about present Trunks, he's basically just a present version of a better written character, the same way that Goten is essentially a worse version of Gohan. And when you think about the duality of these characters, when you consider the fact that Gohan and Trunks are gonna get all of the good development and all of the cool transformations first, these characters are going to be put in a simple situation where they're just never going to be able to compete because those characters came first and got all of the development first, whereas they're basically just getting the seconds and the leftovers of the franchise. So all of the moments that Gohan had as a kid where he headbutted Raditz, and then when he goes over to Planet Namek, he gets to fight against Frieza and show everybody the hidden power that he has when he was a kid, and then he eventually gets a chance to fight against Cell later on and show the world what he can do as a Super Saiyan 2, and then going into the Buu arc, he gets to show everybody else, once again, what he can do there when his potential gets unlocked, and that potential is even greater than Goten and Trunks fusing themselves together. And when we compare this to Future Trunks, he comes from a much more serious timeline, so we don't take his character for granted. When you consider the fact that Future Gohan died when he was extremely young, Bulma's basically just left alone with him in this horrible world where everybody else is basically dead and they're trying to fix the situation, and he's basically the last fighter left to fight against an android duo that can kill him at any moment. And let's also factor in the cool factor. When Future Trunks originally came into what we would call Dragon Ball Z, he had probably the greatest entrance in Dragon Ball history, especially for a new character, as he basically just came in, became a Super Saiyan, wiped out Frieza and his father, and just did it as just a warm-up before Goku came back. And when you consider how cool that moment was and the fact that this character also had more development, growing a bond with the present version of Vegeta, in addition to the fact that he obviously attains more Super Saiyan transformations, ultimately defeats a main villain in Cell, in addition to also a previous main villain in Frieza, and also the android duo of the future timeline, it's going to be pretty hard for the present Trunks to compete with that. That isn't even counting Dragon Ball Super for either character, where Trunks at least tried to wipe out Zamasu by slicing him half, even though Zamasu obviously came back because he was partially immortal. And in the case of Gohan, he obviously had moments where he was training with Goku and Piccolo again, and because of the training that he had with these characters, in addition to what he did in the manga, he managed to defeat Kefla in a draw, I guess you can say, because they were both knocked out. And in the Tournament of Power in the anime variation, he obviously had much more relevant battles, while Goten and Trunks were basically just defending an island because the plot didn't know what they wanted to do with them. But when we break this down into Goten specifically, and even Trunks specifically, the other problem with them is their design. Because of the fact that Goten looks exactly like Goku, it's pretty hard for us to give him any form of individuality because we just basically see him as a kid Goku. Because when you look at the character of Gohan, at least you could say, yeah, he looks very similar to Goku, but the fact that he doesn't look exactly like him at least gives him some form of individuality. And yes, of course, as Goten got older, he, obviously got a makeover and, his hairstyle changed, so he doesn't look exactly like Goku the way he did when he was younger, but all of the damage for his earlier character development that could have been done was gone when you basically have a Goku clone in a universe of Dragon Ball that has so many other Goku clones. And specifically when we go on to Kid Trunks and Future Trunks, this is an interesting case because Specifically, both characters have different colored hair in Dragon Ball Super, which is weird because they're the exact same person. He's basically just a worse, younger clone of his future version, the same way that Goten is basically a clone of Goku, but is also kind of like a clone of Gohan because he's also a descendant of Goku and Chi-Chi. So he was never going to succeed being under the shadow of not only Goku, but his older brother that obviously got all of the hybrid shine. And then we also have to factor in that Gotenks is ultimately a huge reason why Goten and Trunks individually are just not seen as characters that we could take seriously, because when we look at the Boost Saga specifically, and when we look at the battle that Gotenks was involved with, he obviously brought down the series in terms of its maturity level. Now obviously this is expected because Gotenks is obviously a kid, and when you give a little kid all of the power in the world to defeat the main villain, he's obviously going to do childish things with it, so it is written in character. But at the same time, it doesn't take away from the fact that the battles with Gotenks were overly comedic for Dragon Ball standards, even though Toriyama is a gag humor writer. If you look at the fact that Dragon Ball had significantly matured compared to where it was in the earlier stages of Dragon Ball, it just kind of felt out of place for Gotenks to be using that level of gag humor against a villain that was as serious as Majin Buu, especially a villain that had basically killed all of his family and friends at this point. But the biggest point of all that you guys probably saw coming is that because Goten and Trunks fuse into Gotenks, and because Gotenks is basically the key character that represents Goten and Trunks in the present timeline specifically, the problem with this is that it completely reduces the identity of Goten and Trunks as individuals. Because, yes, Goku and Vegeta obviously have fused together multiple times into not only Vegito, but also Gogeta now when you look at Dragon Ball Super Broly. But because of all of the development that those characters have had before that, even going into Dragon Ball GT, you could at least look at Goku and Vegeta and say there's quite a lot about their fighting styles and who these characters are as individuals, to the point where fusing together doesn't stunt the enormous amount of character development that these characters have had for decades. But when you look at it like Goten and present Trunks, who were younger characters when they were originally brought into the Dragon Ball franchise, at a point of the Dragon Ball series that was significantly closer to the end than the beginning and the middle, well, if you do that with the characters, and most of the time where they're relevant in fighting, they basically have to fuse together because individually they're way too weak because they're still kids, then you get a situation where you never look at Goten and Trunks as actual individuals. You always either look at them as Gotenks, or you look at them as like a pair that's always with each other. And as a result of that, because of the existence of Gotenks and always being together as a pair, they never got any form of individuality. And it's crazy to say this, that Dragon Ball GT actually developed Goten and Trunks' personality far greater than they ever did in Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super, but the truth is that it actually did. Say what you want to say about GT, but they did do that at least somewhat. But GT's bigger issue with these characters wasn't really just their development, but the fact that the show was so overly reliant on Goku that in all battle scenes, Goten and Trunks were always basically irrelevant, and they were just basically cannon fodder to just get beaten up before Goku comes and saves them. And ultimately, the biggest reason of all why Goten and Trunks are just never gonna get that level of relevance is simply because of the fact that the older characters are just so much stronger at this current point of Dragon Ball Super, where you can only really use them for like filler manga arcs like we're getting in Dragon Ball Super, or like filler episodes as we saw in Dragon Ball Super in the Potafu arc, because the truth is that when Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, and now Piccolo are so much stronger than all of the other main characters in the series, whereas when you look at future Trunks and present Gohan, and even future Gohan to a lesser degree, that was a totally different case, because future Trunks and future Gohan were the last two characters that could fight against the android threat, so they had to fight. There was no slacking off that could be done. And when we look at the present version of Gohan, because he's always being called on to help out the other characters when Goku's either injured or away or dead, then he's put in a situation where he has to ultimately fight, whereas with Goten and Trunks, you have to go through a long list of other stronger characters before you even get to them being necessary in a battle. Which is why in Resurrection of F, specifically in the movie variation, they were completely absent from the movie and it didn't make a difference at all. So ultimately, when we break everything down, Goten and Trunks never had a chance at becoming successful characters in Dragon Ball, because they were designed to be failed characters in Dragon Ball, for all of the reasons that we just said.